Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Communications here at SBAM. And Brian, let's kick things off on today's show with an update on the presidential election.
Yeah, there's a lot that's been happening, although it does seem like things have kind of settled into a new norm heading down the stretch. Michigan is still considered um, one of the key states that will decide the election. You can really tell by the number of candidates and surrogates that are showing up here. So, in really every conceivable way, control of the House of Representatives, control of the United States Senate, and of course the White House. Michigan's in the middle of it. So we've got an active state Senate, U.S. Senate race. We've got several competitive U.S. House races, and then the presidency. So I looked at the poll averages for the seven states that kind of everybody agrees are going to be the states that decide who wins. And you could not really imagine a closer election than what we see today. So the national polls are quite tight, but also the individual polls in the seven swing states, or the seven states are like outside or inside margin of error type, and the polling averages. So Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, and Arizona. So if you're to look at those states, by the way, take those states out of the mix, and both candidates, assume all the other states are kind of going the way that they usually go, then you'd find that the state is really, or that the race is going to come down to just this razor thin margin. So in Wisconsin, here the polling averages show Harris up by two. In Michigan, Harris up by two. Pennsylvania, Harris up by one. Nevada, Harris up by one. Georgia, Trump up by two. North Carolina, Trump up by one. And Arizona, Trump up by two. So with those differences are so small, even just a slight polling error could make it go flip back and forth between these two candidates. And so I saw a kind of interesting analysis that Nate Cohen did for the New York Times that laid out a kind of, if you applied the polling errors from the 2020 election to these polls, then Trump wins decisively. If you were to apply the polling errors, the average polling errors in 2022 to the election, then Harris would win decisively. So the last two elections, just these slightest kind of swing in these polls with results that close, um, are really going to is really going to make the difference. So I think when you see down the stretch, you're going to see both of these candidates that really start to zero in on turning out their biggest supporters. So like that persuading the middle, how many people really haven't decided right now? That's a good question. It's probably a relatively small number of people. So the real question is, who has the better turnout well, I'll say election day, but really it's the weeks leading up to the election when people are voting. So it's a nail biter. Really is right down the stretch here, about as close as you could possibly imagine. And by the way, there's two elections in the House of Representatives that look particularly close, but the center part of Michigan, that seventh congressional district. So Alyssa Slotkin represents it now, but she's running for U.S. Senate. The Cook Political Report puts that one at the really near the top of the list of the most competitive in the country. A couple of former state senators that are both very strong candidates for their respective parties that are taking each other on there. That's expected to be a very close race. And then another race kind of next door, but to the north and east, that would include areas like Bay, Saginaw, Genesee counties. That race as well, another open seat because of Dan Kildee retiring is expected to be very close to. So, Michigan definitely at the center of this. Oh, by the way, the other thing, the United States Senate race, while Slotkin has uh, generally led in virtually all the polling that has come out, the margin there is pretty slim too. So over the weekend, Mitchell Research put out a poll with MERS News, and they had that race within four. So it really is. If you look at the spending on that one too, you see that the national parties on both sides are both playing here, which both of it means both of them think that they have a shot at winning. So I don't think it's going to slow up one little bit. Probably. Um, the tipping scale, the tipping point state is Pennsylvania, but I would say that Michigan is probably next right after that. So couldn't imagine it closer. And if you're sick of politics, then I got bad news for the next month for you. It's not going to let up. I think it's going to intensify.
All right, well, thanks for that report. Let's move next to a new poll that was released by the Detroit Regional Chamber that covered some insights of economic perception.
Yeah, they were nice enough to send a preview of it to me over the weekend, but then I noticed they put out the press release with the results today. So I just wanted to share some of these poll results. I found them so interesting. So drawing out economic insights in I mean, these insights are kind of all over the board. These are how people are asking or answering these questions, but you can see that people are very torn in how they feel about things and how things are going. In some ways, very positive, in other ways, negative. So, nearly 50% say that the state is unprepared for the economy of the future. 25% say Michigan is not prepared to compete in the global economy over the next 10 years. Uh, and 54% of those without college degrees are unwilling to consider additional education for higher income. So, they also asked a lot of questions about electric vehicles and should Michigan, and kind of a fundamental question, should Michigan be a leader in electric vehicle manufacturing? And it was split pretty evenly. 50% said yes and 45% said no. Um, but for the first time in 4 years, that the number that say that Michigan is on the right track, and this is a pretty broad, that can mean a lot of things, but Michigan on the right track, 53%. First time it's been over 50% in the last 4 years. So that was a move in a positive direction. Um, the concerns over both inflation and recession have dropped. Um, and then even though these numbers, I'm going to read off three statistics here, and they're all three a little bit less than they were in the last survey that they did with Glengarriff, but still high. 80% of people not concerned about their jobs, 72% not having any trouble finding a job. So some people with jobs are still looking for jobs. I think it's an important distinction between those two statistics, and 59% say good jobs are available. All of those were a little bit lower than the last survey, but if you look at the crosstabs, it was really, you can see a divide between metro and rural areas. So that to the extent that those numbers are a little weaker than they were, they're strong, but a little weaker than they were 3 or 4 months ago. It really the weakness is coming from the way that people are answering in rural areas, and then the so you have all those, so mixture of good, positive and negative sentiments. 56% though of people say 56% of people say that the economy is either weakening or in a recession, but 62% say they're doing the same or better than a year ago. So there really are, I felt like I got whiplash reading these survey outcomes and just the way people are feeling about the economy. But if you look at the economic statistics, I guess you can kind of understand that because you can draw a lot of different stories or inferences out of that, and certainly showing up in consumer sentiments.
All right, let's talk about the jobs report. It was actually a surprisingly strong report that came out last week after a couple of disappointing months. So, Brian, do you care to revise your projection that the Fed will lower rates again in November?
Yeah, they were when the Federal Reserve decided to lower rates by 0.5%. You remember I made kind of a big deal about that. It's unusual for them to make cuts that big, but they also kind of projected, or I felt like they were projecting another 0.5% cut in November. And that was because really all of the indicators, they didn't look like they were, the bottom was falling out, but they all looked like they were weakening at that time. And then here comes a jobs report that wasn't like, blow the barn doors off type of jobs report, but it was still way better than what people were expecting. But in addition to that, they revised the August and the July and August jobs report numbers. They actually revised up a little bit. And now before they kept on revising them downward. So for the like several months before that. So people were getting pretty pessimistic that the initial jobs reports were going to be in the future revised down. And and so here comes a positive one, about twice as much than as many economists were expecting, 254,000 plus an increase. And leisure and hospitality was one of the top three, which is a private sector driven statistic, of course. So I think that is on the side of not make as dramatic a change in interest rates. I'll still be very surprised if they don't lower interest rates. But with a jobs report like that coming out, my guess is that there's still kind of upward pressure on wages. They probably will look to at least consider moderating that. So I still think they're probably going to cut rates in November, but maybe it'll be a more customary 0.25% instead of a half.
All right, let's move on to some energy talk. There's a lot of discussions that typically revolve around wind and solar these days, but Palisades might be giving nuclear power some new life here in Michigan. So tell us more.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that have happened this year to that make it very, I would say at this point, likely that the Palisades nuclear power plant will be restarted. So this is the one in Southwest Michigan, and it has been offline for a while now. And Governor Whitmer and former Governor Granholm, who's now the U.S. Energy Secretary, had announced previously $1.54 billion in federal loans to restart the nuclear plant. And it wouldn't be by the previous owner of it or the previous operator of it. It'd actually be a couple of electrical co-ops that would partner together to run it. So the those plans, that was like an announcement, but then those plans have now apparently been finalized or close enough to where it's been announced that the money is being awarded. They're loans, not grants. At least you never know what these government grants they might or loans they might turn out to be. Grants at the end of the day, but in any event, that it's a deal that appears to be moving forward. So it's a pretty substantial shift in Michigan's energy portfolio that had seen movement away from these more, I'll call it traditional, although I don't know if nuclear ever in the U.S. became really traditional the same way that it had in Europe, but just the idea of something that is not renewable energy that is in the portfolio. It was kind of a little kind of side story, but you might recall that as the last change in energy policy happened in Michigan, that they actually started counting nuclear in the renewable category. It's not a renewable energy, but it kind of behaves that way because um, it can run in a way that doesn't it it, uh, it runs without a constant input to it, and so or at least not a constant fossil fuel style input to it. So there's I mean, it looks like a done deal and kind of a big. I don't know that there are any other instances of either new or restarted nuclear plants in the country right now.
All right, let's move on to a Data Monday report.
There's a lot. in this one. So there's so much has come out, and I had to kind of scale it back actually. So I wanted to share with you a few things. We're going to start out. This is Michigan. This part here is Michigan specific, and it is the Bridge Magazine. They do a really nice job with data. But so the the per capita income and the household income dollars have come out, and for these annual updates, and you'll see on the right hand side of the slide here that Michigan's has gone up, and it's been going up, not impressively so. If you compare it to other states, we're 39th in the country, so not in the bottom 10, but awfully close to the bottom 10, but still up. Um, but if you were to look at, so that's nominal gains. If you were to subtract inflation, then you would find that median earnings were down 1.7% in terms of their earning potential. And the one thing that Bridge kind of separated out in graph form that I show here is the cost of food. So at home and dining out, you'll see overall just up, and that's it's one of the inputs that goes along with that statistic. So you can see income rising, unemployment pretty low, um, positive jobs report. But in terms of our earnings, unfortunately, we're not gaining in buying potential or buying power, and we're also not gaining compared to other states. So looking at total in the labor force. So think of this as a different type of view of labor force participation. So how much it has gone up. And you'll see that we've got 4 months in a row of increased national labor force participation. So this is pretty good. It's a nice thing to see. And if you were to look at the labor force participation rate as a percentage, you'll see right in the middle, that's the overall labor force participation. And then in purple on the bottom is among women, and then orange at the top among men. So you see that actually the labor force participation among women was down a little bit, men it was up a little bit, the average pretty flat. But if you were to look at the prime labor force participation, which is that 25 to 54, ages 25 to 54, you'll see that it actually did kind of hook over a little bit, but it's looking pretty good actually, about as strong as it's been going back to around the turn of the century. Here's that jobs report. So you'll see up 254, and this has the revisions included in it. So you'll see that you can kind of talk yourself into a little bit of an upward trend there. Look at the last 3 months. So, but if you're to look at the long term, you still notice like a declining trend. But you know what this looks like to me? It looks like that famous soft landing that people have been talking about for a long time, where yeah, it was going to come down. It has come down, and it's maybe flattening out at a place that's not too bad. Zooming in, you'll see what those months look like. There was a period of revisions that is noted on here as well, where they brought those months down in terms of overall labor force or overall jobs in those months. And but the last few were actually just revised upwards slightly, so look a little bit better than originally reported. So if you look by category, you'll see that these are the same categories but organized differently. On the left, they're just those that produce the most jobs to those who lost the most. And then if you look on the right, it's goods producing versus services producing. So you see that services have had more upward, and this has been the case for a while. Education and health and government being two of the top three overall and two of the top three in service producing, and then leisure and hospitality over the last few months has really made quite an appearance there toward the top. And it's manufacturing and transportation and warehousing that are on the negative side of it. So looking this over, there's nothing that looks dramatically different. Just everything's a little better than what was originally expecting. So this is where you can take a look at the revisions. So down means upward revisions, and then green, or I mean red means downward revisions, and green means upward revisions. You can see they've gone back now and revised some of them upward, which is positive. Now, I actually spoke to a an economist this morning, and asked about these revisions, and basically, he had said that that the surveys are really struggling since the pandemic. It's just people aren't answering. These are based on surveys, and they're huge surveys with tens of thousands of people, but they're just not being answered the same way that they have in the past. And so it does mean that there's a little more volatility to them, and as they gain more insights and gain more responses and answers over time, then they revise those surveys in future months. Okay, so this most of this information I've shown is positive. Here's one that's not particularly positive, and that is that the unemployment duration. So those 27 weeks and over, and the percentage that are 27 weeks and under. That both of those are up, not dramatically up, not up compared to the Great Recession, but definitely up. And so just something to keep an eye on there. Unemployment rate, the national unemployment rate actually ticked down a little bit. So Michigan is now, creeping up. There's some gap. There was a little while when Michigan was lower than the national rate, which is historically significant. But in this case, because we haven't been the last 50 years, we haven't been most of the time below the national average, but we're definitely above it, back above it now. And then the last thing I wanted to share was doesn't actually go with any of the other data. It's just something I keep a close eye on Arbor data. They're just really interesting insights. And because they highlighted the housing market in Detroit as one of the areas that they looked at, they're just comparing the typical mortgage payments, the average mortgage payment compared to the average rental payment. And there's actually in Michigan, there's actually a savings. Those who own homes pay less per month, and that include, it's the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Um, that it's actually $200 less per month. And we have heard a lot about how much rents have been increasing. But as you look across the country, you'll see that it is, most people have those mortgages from several years ago where they, locked in at really low rates, and you can see it's a pretty big difference on the difference, at least a couple $100 a month. Michigan looks pretty similar, frankly, to the rest of the country. So lots of things that came in. In fact, I could have added 10 more slides of additional information. It just seemed like everything came in last week, all this really important information and data. But it kind of muddied up the water a little bit, I think, for the Federal Reserve. You saw the stock market didn't particularly like a strong jobs report because they had kind of locked in an assumption for lower cost borrowing in the future, and that made that maybe a little less likely that the Federal Reserve is going to be as aggressive as they previously expected. But that's just a data point. I think they're longer term. That's one thing about the Federal Reserve is, they don't change their mind very easily. So there'll be a lot more data on a lot of different things that come in before they make that final decision. So I'm still in the camp of I'm expecting another rate cut this year, but I guess we'll see in November.
Yes, we will. Thanks for that report, Brian, and thanks everyone for tuning in today. I do want to remind you that we are hosting several events coming up. You can learn more just at our event calendar, sbam.org/events, including some webinars and some in-person opportunities. So be sure to check those out. Hope you have a great week. We will be back here next Monday at 3 o'clock.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.